At the heart of the idyllic community of Stonebridge stood the Kensington residence, a symbol of stability and refinement. The Kensington brothers, Alexander and Sebastian, were well-known figures in the neighborhood, admired for their charm, intelligence, and the seemingly unbreakable bond they shared. Alexander, the elder by 2 years, was a poised and ambitious corporate lawyer with sharp features and an even sharper wit. Sebastian, a free-spirited musician, balanced Alexander's intensity with his easy charm and infectious laughter. Together, they were a formidable pair, admired and envied in equal measure by those around them. But the delicate equilibrium of Stonebridge was destined to be shattered by the arrival of one woman, Vivienne LaRue. With her enigmatic smile and air of worldly sophistication, Vivienne moved into the long-vacant house next door to the Kensingtons on a balmy June evening. Little did the residents of Stonebridge know that her presence would set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in tragedy, forever altering the fabric of their peaceful community. As the summer heat intensified, so too did the rivalry between Alexander and Sebastian. Their once unbreakable brotherly bond began to corrode under the weight of jealousy and desire. What began as playful competition soon spiraled into a deadly game, with Vivienne as the unwitting prize. The Kensington family had deep roots in Stonebridge, tracing back 4 generations to the town's founding. Their parents had raised Alexander and Sebastian with a blend of old money refinement and new age philosophies, resulting in 2 remarkably different yet equally captivating young men. Alexander seemed destined for greatness from an early age. By 32, he had already made partner at Stonebridge's most prestigious law firm, his name whispered with a mixture of admiration and trepidation in courtrooms across the state. Alexander's life was a carefully constructed edifice of achievements and accolades, but those closest to him sensed an underlying current of discontent, a hunger that no professional triumph seemed able to satisfy. In contrast, Sebastian burst into the world with a carefree spirit, his arrival heralded by a spectacular thunderstorm. From childhood, Sebastian possessed an ethereal quality that drew people to him like moths to a flame. His laughter could lighten the heaviest of hearts, and his music, vibrant and emotive, resonated throughout the community. At 30, Sebastian's life was a kaleidoscope of color and sensation, a stark contrast to Alexander's regimented existence. Despite their differences, the brothers had always been inseparable. They balanced each other, Alexander providing the stability and focus that Sebastian sometimes lacked, while Sebastian brought a spark of spontaneity to Alexander's life. Their bond seemed unbreakable, a fact that made the events to come all the more shocking to those who knew them. The arrival of Vivienne LaRue in Stonebridge was like a stone cast into still waters, sending ripples of curiosity and excitement through the community. Vivienne, at 28, was a stunning woman with a mysterious past. She claimed to be a writer, seeking inspiration for her next novel, but her true motives were known only to her. Vivienne first encountered the Kensington brothers separately, each meeting leaving an indelible impression. Alexander, out for his morning run, nearly collided with her as she emerged from the local coffee shop. Their eyes met over the rim of her steaming cup, and for a moment, Alexander felt a flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Sebastian's introduction came later that same day, as he was setting up for a gig at a local bar. Vivienne, drawn to the music, approached him, her insightful comments on his set list leaving Sebastian both flattered and intrigued. Neither brother realized, as they recounted their encounters over dinner that night, that they had just met the woman who would change their lives forever. The seeds of rivalry between Alexander and Sebastian were planted innocuously enough, nurtured by the subtle competition that had always existed between them. At first, their growing interest in Vivienne manifested in small ways. Alexander began taking his morning runs past her house with increasing frequency, while Sebastian found reasons to play impromptu gigs at the bar where they first met. As summer progressed, both brothers found themselves unconsciously vying for Vivienne's attention. Alexander, typically reserved in social situations, made an effort to engage Vivienne in intellectual discourse whenever they crossed paths. Sebastian, meanwhile, approached Vivienne with his characteristic warmth and spontaneity, inviting her to his performances and introducing her to Stonebridge's small but vibrant creative community. Vivienne, for her part, seemed to genuinely enjoy the company of both brothers, oblivious to the growing tension between them. She found in Alexander a kindred intellectual spirit, someone who could match her wit and challenge her perspectives. With Sebastian, she rediscovered a sense of joy and wonder that years of wandering had nearly extinguished. The rivalry might have remained friendly had it not been for the annual Stonebridge charity auction. The event, held in the town's historic mansion, was the social highlight of the season. This year, however, each brother extended a separate invitation to Vivienne. When Vivienne arrived at the auction, looking stunning in a black gown, the Kensington brothers' faces fell in unison. She greeted them both warmly, seemingly unaware of the silent battle of wills taking place before her. As the evening progressed, Alexander and Sebastian took turns monopolizing Vivienne's attention, each trying to outshine the other. As the auction began, the brothers found themselves locked in a silent bidding war over a weekend getaway for two at an exclusive mountain resort. The bidding started reasonably, but quickly escalated, with Alexander and Sebastian raising their paddles with increasing frequency. The other attendees watched in astonishment as the price soared well beyond the package's value. Vivienne, realizing the bid was more about her than the prize, tried to intervene, but her protest fell on deaf ears. The brothers were too engrossed in their competition to heed her discomfort. In the end, Sebastian won the bid, his final offer eliciting a collective gasp from the crowd. As the auctioneer's gavel fell, Sebastian turned to Alexander with a triumphant smirk, only to find his brother's face a mask of cold fury. Alexander, typically the picture of composure, was visibly shaking with rage. In that moment, something shifted in Alexander's eyes, a hardening, a darkness that sent a chill down Sebastian's spine. Without a word, Alexander turned on his heel and strode out of the ballroom, leaving a wake of whispers in his path. Vivienne, witnessing this exchange, finally grasped the full extent of the brothers' rivalry. She approached Sebastian, her face etched with concern, and gently suggested that perhaps it would be best if she kept her distance from both of them for a while. Sebastian, his victory suddenly hollow, could only nod mutely as he watched her walk away. In the days following the charity auction, Alexander retreated into himself, his usual routines abandoned in favor of long hours spent alone in his home office. To the outside world, it appeared that he was merely nursing his wounded pride, but within the confines of his mind, a sinister plan was taking shape. Alexander had always prided himself on his self-control, his ability to compartmentalize emotions and approach problems with cool logic. But the humiliation of losing to Sebastian, coupled with the fear of losing Vivienne, had cracked his carefully constructed facade. For the first time in his life, Alexander found himself entertaining thoughts that both thrilled and terrified him. At first, these thoughts were relatively innocuous, fantasies of Sebastian falling ill or encountering some minor misfortune that would keep him away from Vivienne. But as the days wore on, fueled by sleepless nights and an increasing sense of desperation, Alexander's imagination took a darker turn. He began to contemplate scenarios in which Sebastian was permanently removed from the equation. These thoughts, initially shocking in their intensity, gradually became more palatable as Alexander's mind worked to justify them. He convinced himself that Sebastian had always been the favored brother, the one who effortlessly captured attention and affection, while Alexander had to work tirelessly for every scrap of recognition. In his distorted reasoning, Alexander began to see Sebastian not just as a rival for Vivian's affections, but as the embodiment of everything he had ever resented in life. Every setback, every disappointment, every moment of self-doubt, Alexander now attributed them all to Sebastian's mere existence. The turning point came on a rain-soaked evening as Alexander sat in his darkened living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. Through the window, he caught sight of Sebastian and Vivian sharing an umbrella as they walked down the street, their heads bent close in intimate conversation. Something snapped inside Alexander at that moment. The last vestiges of brotherly affection crumbled away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was then that the idea of an accident first took root in Alexander's mind, an unfortunate incident that would rid him of Sebastian once and for all, leaving the path to Vivian clear. As lightning illuminated the room, Alexander allowed himself a small, chilling smile. He was, after all, an expert in constructing airtight cases. Surely, he could craft the perfect crime. With the decision made, Alexander threw himself into planning with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him such a formidable lawyer. He approached the task of eliminating his brother with the clinical detachment of a chess player, plotting several moves ahead. His first step was to establish an alibi. Alexander began to cultivate a more visible presence in the community, volunteering at the local animal shelter and joining a book club. He made a point of being seen and heard, creating a network of witnesses who could vouch for his whereabouts and character. Simultaneously, he embarked on a careful study of Sebastian's routines. Under the guise of reconciliation, Alexander began to spend more time with his brother, noting his habits, his schedule, and, most importantly, his vulnerabilities. He paid particular attention to Sebastian's daily jog through Stonebridge Park, a solitary ritual that Sebastian had maintained for years. Alexander's research extended beyond his brother. He spent hours poring over medical journals and forensic reports, learning about accidents that could appear natural yet be orchestrated. He became an expert in the effects of various substances, their detectability, and their ability to mimic natural causes of death. To cover his tracks, Alexander used public computers at the local library to conduct his more questionable searches, always careful to clear the browsing history afterward. He made discreet purchases from different stores across town, accumulating the materials he would need without raising suspicion. As his plan crystallized, Alexander encountered several close calls that threatened to derail his scheme. Once, while mixing a concoction in his garage, a neighbor dropped by unexpectedly. Alexander managed to conceal his work just in time, his heart pounding as he chatted casually over coffee. Another time, Sebastian nearly discovered a notebook where Alexander had jotted down some incriminating notes. Alexander managed to snatch it away, passing it off as a draft for a sensitive legal case. The incident served as a stark reminder of the need for absolute caution. Despite these near misses, Alexander's resolve never wavered. If anything, the close calls only served to sharpen his focus and refine his plan. He became adept at maintaining a facade of normalcy, playing the role of the dutiful brother and respected community member while secretly orchestrating Sebastian's demise. The opportunity Alexander had been waiting for finally presented itself on the eve of Stonebridge's annual marathon, an event in which Sebastian had enthusiastically participated for years. With a sense of grim satisfaction, Alexander realized that the stage was set for his carefully choreographed accident to unfold. The morning of the Stonebridge Marathon dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for running. Alexander awoke early, his nerves humming with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He went through his morning routine with mechanical precision, each action carefully planned to establish his alibi. At 7:30 a.m., Alexander arrived at the marathon starting line, clipboard in hand. He had volunteered as a race coordinator months ago, securing himself a visible role in the day's events. He greeted fellow volunteers with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, his gaze constantly scanning the growing crowd for a glimpse of Sebastian. Sebastian arrived at 8:15 a.m., waving enthusiastically at Alexander, any lingering tension between them seemingly forgotten in the pre-race atmosphere. Alexander waved back, his stomach churning as he thought of what was to come. As Sebastian warmed up, Alexander made his way to the water station at the 5-mile mark, where he had been assigned to distribute refreshments to the runners. This position was crucial to his plan, allowing him to be seen by numerous witnesses while still giving him access to the race route. The starting gun fired at 9:00 a.m. sharp. Alexander watched the sea of runners surge forward, his eyes fixed on Sebastian's retreating form. Then, with a deep breath, he turned his attention to his duties, handing out cups of water with mechanical efficiency. At 9:47 a.m., Alexander excused himself, citing a need for a bathroom break. Instead, he hurried to a secluded spot along the race route, just before a sharp turn that led into a wooded area. Here, he retrieved a small vial from his pocket and carefully spread its contents, a nearly invisible, highly slippery substance, across a patch of the path. Returning to his post, Alexander resumed his role, his heart racing as he awaited Sebastian's approach. At 10:23 a.m., he spotted his brother rounding the bend toward the water station. Sebastian was making good time, his face set in determination as he reached for a cup. Their eyes met for a brief moment as Alexander handed Sebastian the water. In that instant, a flicker of doubt passed through Alexander's mind, a last vestige of brotherly affection crying out in protest, but it was too late to turn back now. Sebastian continued on, oblivious to what lay ahead. Alexander watched, breath caught in his throat, as Sebastian approached the treacherous patch of ground. Time seemed to slow as Sebastian's foot made contact with the slippery surface. The accident unfolded exactly as Alexander had planned. Sebastian's foot slid, his ankle twisting at an unnatural angle, and his momentum carried him forward, sending him careening off the path and down a steep embankment. The sound of breaking branches and a muffled cry echoed through the woods, followed by an ominous silence. For a moment, Alexander stood frozen, the reality of what he had done crashing over him. Then, snapping back to his senses, he raised the alarm, his anguished cries for help convincingly real. As fellow volunteers and paramedics rushed to the scene, Alexander played the part of the distraught brother to perfection, his eyes brimming with tears that were not entirely feigned. As Sebastian's motionless form was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, Alexander felt a strange mix of horror and relief. The deed was done. Now all that remained was to see his plan through to its bitter end. The news of Sebastian Kensington's tragic accident sent shockwaves through Stonebridge. The vibrant musician, beloved by many, had suffered severe head trauma and multiple fractures in his fall. He lingered in a coma for 3 days before succumbing to his injuries, leaving the community in mourning and disbelief. The initial investigation into Sebastian's death was cursory, given the public nature of the event and the presence of numerous witnesses. The police were inclined to view it as a tragic accident. Alexander's performance as the grief-stricken brother was flawless, his composed exterior cracking just enough to reveal glimpses of raw emotion that seemed genuine to all who saw him. In the days following Sebastian's funeral, a somber affair attended by what seemed like the entire town, Alexander threw himself into managing his brother's estate. He handled the tasks with his usual efficiency, all the while playing the role of the bereaved sibling to perfection. The first thread in Alexander's carefully woven tapestry of deception came loose 6 months after Sebastian's death. Amelia Thornton, a junior associate at Alexander's law firm, was tasked with organizing old case files when she stumbled upon a peculiar notebook hidden among Alexander's papers. Curiosity piqued, Amelia flipped through the pages, her eyes widening as she realized the sinister nature of its contents. The notebook contained detailed notes on various poisons and their effects, along with what appeared to be a meticulously planned timeline. While no names were mentioned, the final date corresponded chillingly with the day of Sebastian's fatal accident. Unsure of what to do with this information, Amelia confided in her boyfriend, Detective Lucas Reeves. Reeves, a by-the-book officer who had always felt uneasy about the quick resolution of Sebastian's case, saw this as an opportunity to reopen the investigation. He began by quietly re-examining the evidence, paying particular attention to details that had been overlooked in the initial inquiry. A breakthrough came when Reeves interviewed Martin Holloway, a retired chemist who lived near the accident site. Holloway recalled seeing Alexander near the wooded area shortly before Sebastian's fall, despite Alexander's insistence that he had been at the water station the entire time. This discrepancy, coupled with the suspicious notebook, was enough for Reeves to dig deeper. As the investigation progressed, more inconsistencies in Alexander's story came to light. Security camera footage from a nearby convenience store showed Alexander purchasing unusual combinations of chemicals in the weeks leading up to the marathon. A forensic re-examination of Sebastian's running shoes revealed traces of an artificial polymer designed to reduce friction, a substance that had no business being on a running trail. Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, Vivienne Leroux. Racked with guilt over her role in the brothers' rivalry, Vivienne came forward with a series of text messages from Alexander. The messages, sent in the heat of their competition for her affections, revealed a level of animosity towards Sebastian that bordered on obsession. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the true picture of what had transpired on that fateful day began to emerge. Alexander's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble under the weight of mounting evidence. The final nail in the coffin came during a search of Alexander's home office. Hidden behind a false panel in his desk, detectives discovered a vial containing traces of the same polymer found on Sebastian's shoes, along with a series of detailed notes outlining the plan to stage an accident during the marathon. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, Alexander's composure finally shattered. In a moment of desperation, he attempted to flee, leading police on a tense car chase through the streets of Stonebridge. The pursuit ended at the very spot where Sebastian had fallen, with Alexander's car skidding off the road in a cruel twist of irony. As he was led away in handcuffs, the mask of the grieving brother fell away completely. The residents of Stonebridge watched in shock as Alexander Kensington, once a pillar of their community, was revealed to be the architect of his own brother's demise. The arrest and subsequent confession of Alexander Kensington sent shock waves through Stonebridge, shattering the town's idyllic image and forcing its residents to confront the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface of their community. The courtroom drama unfolded like a twisted mirror image of Alexander's legal career, with the once respected lawyer now sitting at the defendant's table. His impassioned plea of temporary insanity, citing the extreme emotional stress of his rivalry with Sebastian, fell on deaf ears. The jury, comprised of many who had once admired him, took less than a day to return a guilty verdict. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.